This is Jocko Podcast, number 65, with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
The things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities or near necessities were P38 can openers, pocket knives, heat tabs, wrist watches, dog tags, mosquito repellent, chewing gum, candy, cigarettes, salt tablets, packets of Kool-Aid, lighters, matches, sewing kits, military payment certificates, sea rations, and 2 or 3 canteens of water. Together, these items weighed between 12 and 18 pounds, depending on a man's habits or rate of metabolism. Henry Dobbins, who was a big man, carried extra rations. He was especially fond of canned peaches in heavy syrup over pound cake. Dave Jensen, who practiced field hygiene, carried a toothbrush, dental floss, and several hotel-sized bars of soap he'd stolen on R&R in Sydney, Australia. Ted Lavender, who was scared, carried tranquilizers until he was shot in the head outside the village of Thate Cay in mid-April. By necessity, and because it was SOP, they all carried steel helmets that weighed 5 pounds, including the liner and camouflage cover. They carried the standard fatigue jackets and trousers. Very few carried underwear. On their feet, they carried jungle boots, 2.1 pounds, and Dave Jensen carried 3 pairs of socks and a can of Dr. Scholl's foot powder as a precaution against trench foot. Until he was shot, Ted Lavender carried 6 or 7 ounces of premium dope, which for him was a necessity. Mitchell Sanders, the RTO, carried condoms. Norman Bowker carried a diary. Rat Kiley carried comic books. Kiowa, a devout Baptist, carried an illustrated New Testament that had been presented to him by his father, who taught Sunday school in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. As a hedge against bad times, however, Kiowa also carried his grandmother's distrust of the white man, and his grandfather's old hunting hatchet. Necessity dictated. Because the land was mined and booby-trapped, there was SOP for each man to carry a steel-centered nylon-covered flak jacket, which weighed 6.7 pounds, but which on hot days seemed much heavier. Because you could die so quickly, each man carried at least 1 large compress bandage, usually in the helmet band, for easy access. Because the nights were cold and because the monsoons were wet, each carried a green plastic poncho that could be used as a raincoat or ground sheet or makeshift tent. With its quilted liner, the poncho weighed almost 2 pounds, but it was worth every ounce. In April, for instance, when Ted Lavender was shot, they used his poncho to wrap him up, then to carry him across the paddy, then to lift him onto the chopper that took him away. And that excerpt is from a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. And the book is about the Vietnam War, and it's actually a blend of nonfiction and fiction. And part of that blend comes from what he actually experienced for real as a soldier in Vietnam, in 3rd Platoon, Alpha Company, 5th Battalion, 46th Infantry Regiment. And incidentally, he was in the same division and the same area of operations where the My Lai massacre took place. And then that reality is intermingled with his thoughts and ideas and stories that put together a unique perspective on war. But the book is considered fiction, and I don't like to dig too deep on fictional books, so I'm not going to go too deep on this one. But I was having a little conversation with my brother Leif Babin, with whom I wrote a little book called Extreme Ownership, and Leif and I were talking about the things that we carried.